Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be taking a look back at the books I read in January of 2018. I was watching Mark Nash's bookshelf book tag and realized that I had forgotten to do the random generator book. So I will I'll finish that off at the end of this video. And before I begin, sorry if the video is a little dark. I don't know why the camera it's looking so dark. So let's get started with the books I read in January of 2018, which, much like January of 2017, was a pretty rough month. So the first book I read, I attempted in 2018, is The Changeling by Victor Laval, which I billed at, according to my notes, at 60 pages. If memory serves, I think this was when Russell of Ink and Paper blog was doing a around the world in X number of books book club, and The Changeling was the first book that would represent North America, and I didn't like the book at all. I thought it was really bad fantasy, trying to be literary fiction, or literary fiction trying to be fantasy. It didn't work for me at all. The next book I read was Star Trek Technology by Ethan Siegel. So the book's a bit about like how the science depicted in Star Trek could be real. And I thought it was okay. I don't remember much about the book. And I think probably you could read like Michio Kaku's Science of the Impossible. I think would actually be a much better book than Technology would be. Although Kaku has some issues too, particularly his usage of the Kardashev scale, and how just because a galactic empire is a galactic civilization does not necessarily mean that they produce the energy required to be a Kardashev 3 civilization. Size of space polity does not equate amount of power generation. And clearly that is shown in the films, at least. They're nowhere near enough power to make Kardashev 3. Anyway, enough ranting about that. Next, I attempted Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. I'm thinking this would have been the second time I've read it, or attempted it. And I bailed roughly at the same place I bailed the last time I tried it. One of my pet peeves about space opera is where characters, usually the protagonist from a space polity with sleek and amazing technology, go into a bar that could have been basically straight out of the Old West, with maybe a few technological updates, but it's still very rough, and that put me off. Also, while the conceit of using a she as a universal gender signifier is amazing and very interesting, it also, at least immediately, gives off a sense of cultural chauvinism, which I'm not entirely sure Lecky was quite going for. Although I do think the Ratch, I think that's how you call the civilization, is an imperialistic and chauvinistic, or culturally chauvinistic society. So anyway, but I never really made it past the first or second chapter. Just, it's not for me, I think. The next book was another Bale. There's something about January and me that I'm just, not reading very good books, I guess. So the next book was The Clockwork Dynasty by Daniel H. Wilson. Which I don't remember anything about it. So, but according to my notes, it was a pretty terrible steampunk novel. And next was Someone by Alice McDermott, which I remember it not being nearly as good as Charming Billy. The next is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I billed after the first chapter. So the thing about Miller's work, or at least the two works that she's most famous for, is sort of novelizations of Greek mythology. First, The Song of Achilles, and then later, Circe. The thing about The Song of Achilles is that Patroclus, the first-person narrator, he is very much a modern, contemporary gay character inserted into a heroic age or mythological age of Greece. So it doesn't quite work. There's something that just doesn't quite work. And while I did bail on the book, I did sort of read ahead, particularly to the end, and yeah, that is not what happens in the Greek myth, and that's not what happens in the Iliad. Patroclus was universally popular and loved. What happens at the end, just no. So anyway, and later on we will get to Circe for 2018, which I have thoughts there too, but Song of Achilles, I didn't like it at all. I thought it was just like a modern insertion, and it just didn't read right at all. Next is The Murder at the Vicarage. So in 2018, I decided to read all of the Miss Marple novels in order of publication. And The Murder at the Vicarage was the first one, and I quite enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It's the second time I've read it. The most recent reread last week was the third time. And I quite enjoyed it. It's a really good read. Not necessarily my favorite Miss Marple novel, but it certainly got me out of my reading slump. And next is Line by Line by Claire Kerwald Cook. This is a writing book that I thought was okay. But according to my notes, it seems to have been better for nonfiction than fiction writing. So from there, I went on to Alexander the Great and His Empire by Pierre Briant, which I really enjoyed. So I'm wondering if definitely, I think this is a book I want to add to my history shelves. So I'll definitely make a note of that while I'm uploading this, is to track down a copy. It seems I really enjoyed it. So next, Power and Imagination, City-States in Renaissance Italy by Loro Marines. I seem to have thought it was quite dry. I don't remember much about it. But I'm thinking I wanted something like specific, and it didn't quite do it for me. Next is Texas Blood by Roger D. Hodge. I thought it was okay, but maybe a bit too memoir-y. All things said and done. Next is The Internationalist by Una A. Hathaway and Scott J. Shapiro. I DNF'd it, and I don't remember much about it. But according to my notes, it seems I was looking for something specific, and I didn't quite get it. The next book I read is The Vast Southern Empire by Matthew Karp. I love this book. It's about the South's influence on American foreign policy during the build-up to the Civil War, and how the South became increasingly more and more like a spoiled brat, which I might come back, probably will feature in this week's Weekly Reads. And also, a bit of a spoiler alert for this coming book haul. Anyway, but I really did enjoy this Vast Southern Empire. It's an amazing book. Next is God Against the Gods by Jonathan Kirsch, which I DNF'd. And I think it was mostly, I didn't like the writing, and it didn't really add anything to the subject. So next, The Evolution of Strategy by Beatrice Hauser. Okay, so now I remember. So I think when I was, a lot of my reading, particularly history, was I was researching how to think up like political and military and governmental strategy. I'm a fantasy writer, and that's one thing that I'm really interested in figuring out, is how to do a really good approximation of a grand strategy, military strategy, how that works, rather than just groping my way to hopefully something that maybe might be realistic. And I've had a hard time trying to find those books, or good books on that subject. Next up is Oliver Loving by Stephen Merrill Block. Don't remember much about it, but I did DNF it. Next up, The Evangelicals by Francis Fitzgerald, which I didn't like either. Although I might come back to that one. Maybe. My note for this one is as simple: what was I thinking? Next was Papyrus by John Godet, which again was a DNF. And next up is The Power by Naomi Alderman. So another one of my pet peeves is sort of the found document narrative, where a novel is passed off as a found document, which was quite common in the Victorian period, particularly for what we would consider today genre fiction. And while it might have worked in the Victorian period, it kind of seems a bit dated today. And that was one of my dislikes about the book. Another one was it had that sense of a writer who's primarily interested in literary fiction, trying to write fantasy and failing miserably at it. And I DNF'd it. Next, The Forest of 1,000 Lanterns by Julie C. Dow, which I DNF'd. The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Peckenham. Oh, it was a massive tome. And I think I quite liked it, but I do want to come back to it. So there's a lot of books here that I want to probably add to my collection. Next, The Guide to Writing Fantasy and Science Fiction by Philip Athens, which is a really good how to write science fiction and fantasy. It doesn't have much in the way of particular like character building, but for the whole it is quite good. Next, Pastoral Pointers by Richard McKinley, which I quite liked. I've talked about this book a bit before. I especially like the ending where he talks about the business of art, which one very rarely gets in these books. Next, Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. I wasn't a fan of the writing, and I ended up DNFing it. So, ultimately, January of 2018 was a very, very rough reading month for me. Not a whole lot of books really did it for me. There was a ton of DNFs, which in a way makes me feel a bit okay because I had quite a few, already this month, a good amount of DNFs or bails. And so yeah, so I'm not as broken up about the number of bails I have this month so far, given that in 2018 I had a ton of bails. But anyway, so that wraps up the books I read in January of 2018. So now let's make up the bit of the bookshelf book tag that I missed when I did it, largely because it asks you to select a book based on a random generator, and the easiest way for me to do that would be to ask my tablet. And I'm not entirely sure if when I asked my tablet, it would basically boot me out of filming, and I haven't quite gotten the hang of editing, or even tried to get the hang of editing yet. So anyway, watching Mark Nash's video this morning, I decided to go ahead and realize, I hadn't done this yet. So I decided, since I would have my documents open when I did what I read in 2018, I could just go ahead and do my library catalog and use that to pick the book. So how I organize my catalog is the first batch of books are writing books, and then the last books are art and cooking. And then in the middle, everything else is organized alphabetically. And the book selected was 301, which is The Mirror Empire by Kameron Hurley. This is an epic fantasy. It's the first book in a trilogy, and it shows a grimdark world being invaded by another grimdark reality. I honestly didn't like it all that much. I want to come back to it eventually. One of my ideas was to go ahead and pick up the third and final book in the trilogy and have another go at the whole trilogy, but I don't know. I probably really shouldn't do that because it would more than likely end up being a waste of money. But anyway, so the thing about The Mirror Empire is that it's very sort of, it's grimdark, it's very sort of biopunk, and just it didn't work for me. But anyway, so that was my makeup for the bookshelf tag. Tomorrow I'll do a tag. Steve Donahue had one Friday that I think is really fun, and also I will do the Miss Marple tag tomorrow too. I just need to go ahead and write out the questions so that I can copy and paste them into the video and not forget about it. So anyway, BookTube, thank you. Have a great afternoon, and please stay safe. Thank you, BookTube.